Hello there.
This is a recording of my process illustrating a book cover for Mice and Men. Now, I am very new to recording software, so I will have to make a big disclaimer, which is that the first 3 minutes of this video, unfortunately, will be in a horrendous quality. I do apologize sincerely, and I hope you forgive me because those will only be the first 3 minutes of this video. However, the sketch you can see on screen, I have not unfortunately recorded the process of me drawing the sketch, but believe me, it wasn't that important. Now, as you can see, the quality is just absolutely terrible. You can feel free to not look at the screen. However, I would be doubtful that my voice alone would be enough to console you, given that the quality of my voice is highly questionable. However, I believe that the positive side to this very amateurish fail of mine is that right now I'm only laying in my values, which don't really require to see a lot of detail, so just bear with me, it will get better, I promise. After I've made the sketch, I'm laying in the initial values, trying to, because there are so many elements on the page, I'm trying to figure out a way in which all of the elements would be visible and contrasting against one another without becoming visual noise and clutter, as it were. This takes a lot of trial and error, and generally during this process you will see a lot of trial and error, because that is the way I get my things done. I believe there is, well, at least I haven't yet found any viable alternative, so we'll keep going with the tried and true method. Now, this is not a how-to, God forbid, please do not take this as an educational video. If there is something you infer from this video, I will be more than happy. However, it is not my goal to pretend like I am an instructor or any matter of authority when it comes to painting. This is simply my process of how I do this, mostly for myself other than anyone else, but hey, if you have somehow stumbled upon this video, you are very much welcome, and I hope you can feel like you haven't wasted 45 minutes of your time. Like I kind of feel like I did during a lot of this process. But anyway, the quality is about to get better. There's just a little bit more to get through, and I promise, well, it will at least be better than this. By this time, I have already pretty much figured out my values, and now it's only a matter of starting to refine some things and detail. Boom, there we go. Now, although at least the quality is much better, you can also see my terrible mistakes now in a higher quality, so I hope you enjoy the spectacle. I've tried laying in some colors, didn't work, so I abandoned it. The original vision in my head was mostly black and white, so that is what I will be sticking to for the duration of this process. Now, I want to also talk a little bit about the book itself, because it's a very dear book to me. I really, really enjoyed it, and it left an impact on me, especially the ending, which was just a gut punch, just a merciless sucker punch right in the middle. Absolutely horrendous experience. Do not recommend. But actually, no, this is a very good book, and I do recommend it. That made no sense. But if I were going to pretend as if anything in this video makes sense, I would be lying. In any case, the story was very dear to me, and I've decided to pay a little bit of a tribute by designing a book cover for it. As you can see, or I guess as I hope is relatively obvious, that the main dark shape has this form of a mouse, the silhouette of a mouse, which I thought, well, the book's title is Of Mice and Men, so I thought this could be self-explanatory. Let me know if you read it as a mouse straight away, or if I ended up making such an absolute mess out of it that the silhouette is lost completely. That is also very probable and very acceptable. However, I tried my best to portray it as what I originally intended it to be, which was a silhouette of a mouse. Now, I must say that the face of Lenny there on the, well, the screen keeps switching, so I'm not going to bother with left and right, but the face in white, predominantly, is Lenny, and his gorgeous profile has been a really surprising addition to myself. I was mostly expecting to just fit all of the elements that I wanted into the silhouette of the mouse, but turns out that Lenny just didn't fit. There were too many things to incorporate, Lenny didn't fit, and I couldn't leave him out because he's like the main tie of the entire book. So this sudden idea of the mouse's snout, the silhouette of the mouse, and the head becoming like a beret for some reason, a very fancy beret, by the way. I would really love to have one of those. For Lenny, was quite spontaneous, and I'm actually really, really satisfied with it. I wonder if it's in any way readable, or if it actually is distracting from the silhouette of the mouse, which is also valid and a fair concern that I also had, which is why I decided to keep the values as, well, in this case, high key, because they are in the light spectrum rather than dark, which is why I decided to keep them in this high key scheme to limit the amount of contrast, because I didn't want Lenny's face to take too much away from the silhouette of the mouse. I have to say that most of the change, or at least the visible change, is going to be happening in the beginning of the process, simply because it is more obvious. The detailing is going to become clear due mainly to the contrast of the very, very loose and sloppy brushwork that is happening right now, rather than at the end when most of the detail is already down, and I will be adding some, finishing touches. And I think contrast is a very interesting thing to play with, especially because in control and contrast, masters like, well, especially my favorite artist at this time, Piotr Jablonski, praise be, God Among Men, he puts his maximum contrast onto the point that he wants us to focus on. And when I say maximum contrast, I mean he can have the whole canvas be some one color or one value, but you notice that there isn't anywhere really darker in the rest of his piece apart from the middle point. Like, where the focal point is are both the lightest and the darkest values, which makes it have this very juicy contrast and makes it pop from the page and just be candy to the eye. And oh dear God, I love his work so much. But let's move on and talk a little bit more about this cover that I'm doing. Right now, I'm trying to work on the hand holding the gun, which comprises like the leg of the mouse silhouette. And I'm playing with values yet again, because at this point I'm not yet sure as to what my value... Well, I have previously kind of mocked up a rough version of my values during the, horrendous video quality stage of the process. But at this point, there are still going to be many changes, even within the value structure, as you will see going a little bit further into the process. Right now, though, what I'm trying to do is mainly to start detailing the hand, and I've decided to make it a dark on light object. This was a curious experiment for me as well, because this is, I believe, the second piece which I am doing in this very graphic sort of style. I have another one in my repertoire that has used similar techniques. However, this one has a lot more plays with tangents. Cynic's design's worst fear, and I definitely get him. However, I found a certain fascination in attempting to conquer the tangents and make them work to my advantage, like the cruel human being that I am. I want to exploit them and torture them to make them work for my own benefit and the benefit of the image. This is why I, as you can see, the point of meeting between George's face and Curly's wife's face makes a silhouette for Crooks and his crooked back, which honestly I'm kind of proud of myself for that one, because I think this shape language ended up being pretty good. I'm actually, quite fond of this, because I really like the grotesque, exaggerated, disproportionate shape language. I think it is beautiful, and even though I used all of these adjectives with probably negative connotations, I'm deeply in love with these wedging out silhouettes, exaggerating the features of the human body to grant specific character traits to people. I think it's fascinating. And so I was very pleased with how this silhouette came out. Also, this process is sped up God knows how many times. I've lost count of how many times I've sped this up. So I apologize. There shouldn't really be any flashes or anything. But if there are, my deepest apologies. I am a very, very painfully slow painter. I am the first to admit that. So in order for this process to be able to fit into a 45-minute video, which is not short in any way, shape, or form, well, again, it's a matter of It's a matter of relativity, you may say, and you'd be absolutely right, but the average YouTube viewer would not call a 45-minute video a short one. But then again, we aren't average here, are we? We're painters, we're romantics, we are excessively extraordinaires. Any more words with an EX prefix do not come to my mind at this point, but if they will, I shall use them in my vocabulary. My point is that I paint very, very slow. I think a lot in between applying any sort of strokes, which is why a lot of this video is so insanely sped up, because I spend most of my time just looking at the piece and not actually drawing. That is the deep, dark secret of any artist, I think. Well, as you saw now, I had applied a opacity, that's the word. I have applied a medium opacity white layer on top of the picture, and went in again with a pencil and drew a silhouette of crooks for me to, just be able to conceptualize his forms better. It is usually pretty necessary for myself if I have as rough a sketch as I did at the start of this process, to then go in and make some changes, define some things better mostly, to save myself time later, even though I don't save time. I wish I did, but being honest, I have a long way to go. Right now, as you can see, I am painting Crooks's face and the highlight on his face. And this, I think, marks the beginning of the sagas of infinitely just repainting and redrawing everything. We will see this plenty of times, trust you me. This is just one example where I am not sure as to how the highlight should lay to contrast his silhouette just enough, but also to hint at the forms of his head, because it is a 3D object in space, and shining a light from it on it from a certain angle will produce highlights, especially on dark skin tones. Dark skin tones are just inherently more reflective than light skin tones. It will produce a contour light that, despite the namesake of contour, is not actually a contour. It's just a selection of shapes that kind of hint at unveiling the real 3D shapes, but reveal just enough where you kind of believe that there is a 3D shape, but actually no, it's just a 2D silhouette with some brushstrokes just laid in there by a lazy painter like myself. Do not trust painters. They will do any sort of shortcut available, such as using the lasso tool, as you've witnessed me do already quite a few times in this video, or, I mean, the most criminal sort of cheating in art style, absolutely unacceptable, is photo bashing. My goodness, how do we allow society to function with people that photo bash? Criminal, absolutely criminal. In any case, at this point I've started rendering George's face there, I believe. That's right. And as you'll see, there are a bunch of times where, I keep turning the layer off and on. I sometimes just erase sections of his face and start over. That is because, as any human being, I am deeply, deeply terrified of change. And if you are not, well, congratulations, from this point on, you are responsible for the evolution of the human race. Please keep going. But I am deeply, deeply afraid of change. So before sticking to any sort of decision that I make, I, I test to see, is this really what I want? Because from my not very many years of life, one thing that I know for certain is not to trust my own brain. It plays dirty tricks on me and is genuinely a piece of shit. This naturally led me to question a lot of my own decisions, as I constantly do, especially in painting, which is why I start making changes on a new layer, because if I don't like something, I can just go back and delete it and start anew. It's kind of like a foolproof thing that allows me to be very malleable and make the process, very manipulating. Well, with potential for manipulation. Uh, there might be a word for that I'm just forgetting, as usual. At this point, George's face is looking quite menacing. I did not intend it to look menacing, but somehow it ended up being so. Uh, in the story, George is obviously not very menacing. He's supposed to be kind of like the other protagonist. But for the sake of this cover, as you can see, the values are mostly like light on the side of the cheek. George's face is lit up from the side, basically, and the light that lands on his cheekbone creates a light value, and on his other side, there is like this white, also like a light shape of light. How many times did I say light already? That also frames his face against against everything else, which is why I wanted the front part of his face, the brow, the cheekbone, the nose, to be a dark value to contrast from the light shape besides it. There you can also see I'm adding a highlight on his nose. Um, I wanted to keep sort of two main, um, more or less consistent light sources. One from the top right of the image, so pretty much above Lenny's beret. Very fancy beret. I'm jealous. And one on the side, kind of like behind Curly's wife's face, which shines on both Curly's wife and Crux and on George, his lower like cheekbone. Obviously, in real life, that would not happen. These different lighting scenarios would require different light sources, but it's not about making things realistic, it's about making things believable, as some wise painters have said. And I absolutely agree. There is absolutely no point in making a painting realistic, because reality already exists. If, painting is for making things cool, and if you want to make things cool, sometimes we have to disregard reality, because, as the past few years have proved, reality, most of the time, is far, far from cool. Now, this perhaps all may be a reasoning for myself to excuse my need to play God in my own little world, in which case, the three witches are coming for me. I'm gonna start seeing floating bloody daggers soon, in which case, celebrate my demise. But so far up to this point, I'm simply content with being able to paint whatever the heck I want, and however the heck I want to. Although I try to be mostly adherent to some laws of reality. Now, as you can see on the bottom there was perhaps the biggest change during the whole entire process, which is that I've replaced the wheel, the tractor wheel that was on the bottom of the shape, with the head of Candy's dog. Honestly, I think this was a very good change. It managed to solve a lot of the value problems because it added a big shape that didn't clutter the bottom part of the image. If because the wheel didn't exactly form any major tangents, didn't fill up that entire space, there would have been a lot of gaps of different values. And when there's a lot of different values very close, it usually makes the image look clustered, which can be, I'm not saying that it's bad, because that is also a tool, but it is the wrong tool in this case. You wouldn't be cropping your nails with pliers, or at least I wouldn't. I don't know, everyone has their own preferences. However, this was simply the wrong tool, I think, and changing the wheel into Candy's dog's head, I think really benefited the piece. It also provided a nice tangent to Crooks's legs, with the snout and the nose, which also satisfied, ticked off one of my other goals with this piece, which was, to use tangents well and to make it satisfying. Tangents are honestly very rarely satisfying, but most of the time that happens because the original creator did not notice that there was a tangent. I personally would not include tangents in any piece that I intended to be quote-unquote realistic or scenic, in any sort of illustration that was supposed to be kind of like a snapshot, like a picture of a happening moment. But because this is clearly a more graphic design-ish sort of picture, I will allow myself the guilty pleasure of committing tangent fraud. Yeah, as you can see, the wheel is flashing there. Sometimes I'm, once again, engaging how beneficiary was the change to the image overall, and I've certainly decided that it was beneficiary enough to keep. By the way, if I am pronouncing something incorrect, or I am inventing words, I officially have the privilege of saying that English is not my mother tongue, even though, that is the main language I've studied in school with for most of my life. But hey, I wasn't technically born in an English-speaking country, so there you go. I am officially excused from grammar. Now, another kind of issue, quote unquote, or at least concern that I faced was the part of the sleeve of the hand with the gun. I just I couldn't come up with anything to fill up this, the underside of the arm that formed the shape of the leg of this general silhouette of the mouse. Now, the process is slowly coming closer to a close. Dear God, I just went on a tangent about language. I am at this point starting to work on the face of Kelly's wife, and interesting thing is the larger the details are, such as Lenny's head, Kelly's wife's head, the less changes I make to them, which is curious, as I would also think that if an element is larger, it would require it to be more meticulously detailed. However, in this piece, I think the reverse was necessary. The most detailed parts of the image are also the smallest elements of the image, such as, George's face, Crook's candy stalk's head, and the hand with the gun. They are the most detailed because I wanted to make the lower half of the mouse's body more concentrated and more dense in detail, as I've said before. But in order to do so, once again, I must employ contrast to my advantage, and by making less shapes at the top, and by leaving those big shapes quote unquote blank, it creates a dichotomy between the bottom half and the top half of the image, where in the bottom half, because there are more shapes, there is visually more noise and more what we call detail. I think it's a very, very clever trick that allows us artists to cheat and get away with not actually detailing things as much as we could, because we could just be artistic and say that I am creating a dichotomy in the piece between detail and non-detail, and just leave great fractions of the canvas blank without detail and call it art. I am not the first one to have thought of this. Look again at my idol, whatever, Piotr Jablonski, praise be. Look at this. Like, how does he get away with this? How does he manage to crop half of the guy's face and get away with it? It's outrageous. It's incredible. I hate it, but I love it at the same time. So following in the steps of such, masters, obviously, There are a lot of graphic painters that I admire, and I will probably be showing a slideshow or, inserting some pictures in there to feed your imagination as to what kind of a taste I have, what kind of artist I like, and what kind of artist I was inspired by to make this image. Generally, the main idea behind this image is that I would like to eventually I would like to make more book covers. I enjoy it. I would like to, be professional at it, which requires obviously mileage, which is why I'm doing this and you are now watching me do this. Another beast in book design, book cover design, is obviously the lettering, which, I have yet to conquer, but I think I am getting slightly better at this. I might be very horribly mistaken, but I'm trying my best. It's something really curious that in the later years I so relate, I guess, to I think it was Picasso's quote that said it took me 5 years to paint like Raphael, but a lifetime to learn how to paint like a child. Now, the first part of the quote I don't so much relate with, because if you in 5 years learned how to paint like Raphael, yeah, you're probably not normal. You're definitely not me, so congratulations, I guess. Or, if geniuses tend to be those troubled human souls, then my condolences. But more so the second part of the quote, which mentions that it took him a lifetime to paint like a child, which, first of all, I mean, yeah, that's fair. Some of his paintings do look like a child, but it also has a sort of charm to it, where this is someone who hasn't just picked up a pen yesterday and started doodling because they simply have nothing better to do with their life. You generally, if a painter is well renowned, you can tell. You can really tell. I guess that is why all of those boring classical artists, academic artists, keep repeating, learn the rules before you break the rules. There is actually a pleasant challenge in making something simple out of something complex. I think it's even more difficult than making something complex out of something simple, because reality is infinitely complex. We don't really see anything. It's just photos, photons bouncing off of objects and hitting our eye receptors that make our brain, conjure up this sort of image in our minds. But really, reality is infinitely complex, and you can never get more detailed than reality in a painting. So, how no matter how hard you try to render a bottle, you can spend an eternity painting just that one bottle, adding more highlights, more detail. You will never reach the level of complexity of reality, but actually simplifying it into simple shapes can be very difficult because we have to be discriminatory. And now this is the part where I get cancelled, because discrimination is hyper important in painting and art in general. It is the way in which we do everything. We discriminate night and day. We choose the biggest, or the most important shapes, and we discard everything else, which is what I'm also employing in parts of this image. Like, for example, the gun, in which you may have seen that there was, the black silhouette of the gun, and I just simply added some white little dots on it and strikes, and it made it look like it was a 3D gun, even though the shadow, or I guess the dark parts of it, is all just one shape. That's what I mean when I say we have to discriminate, because a gun has a lot of different little shapes in its dark areas, and I lumped them all as one. I put them all into one box, stuck a label to it, was a horrible human being, absolutely lumped all of the myriads of little tiny particles and details and colors into just one value and said, that is it, that is what you are. So we as painters are just generally kind of asses, like sometimes, most of the time, maybe. You know what I mean. You probably know an artist friend, or if you're watching this, you're probably an artist yourself. But I think I've rambled on too much because we're coming to the end of the video. I don't believe we've made this, but apparently we have. This is me just adding some finishing touches. There was a whole saga of me attempting to paint Lenny's beret and then coming back to the original stage and then trying to add detail and then removing detail, because as I've said, I'm tremendously afraid of change, and sometimes, it takes me a while to realize that what I did at first was actually good, but then I'm like, no, but this can't be good, can it? And I spend like countless hours trying to change it, only to realize that, no, you moron, it was good in the first place. And then I have to delete all of those countless hours of work to go back to the beginning, which is,
But it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
There was also a part of the process in which I obviously tackled making the text and the font of this cover, which I, for some godforsaken reason, decided to do by hand. I mean, judging from the amount of poor decisions you witnessed throughout this process, shouldn't be surprising, but sometimes I want to have better expectations about myself. This element of the spiral is actually an inspiration that I got from another edition of the book that I have myself, which has these really cool, like, spiraling pathway as well, which I thought really connected to the theme of the book and the narrative, and so I made the sparkling like tractor tracks to be like the tail of the mouse. Oh, and also I think I had this, probably one of the best decisions in this cover, finally, for once, is to erase part of it and to replace it by writing the author's name, John Steinbeck. I think it ended up being, overall, not a bad piece. I'm happy with it. There are a lot of flaws that obviously anyone can make, but in the end, I've spent my time doing what I love, which is painting, and this is how the result turned out. Thank you for enduring the sound of my voice, or perhaps you haven't, in which case, yeah, you've made a wise decision. Congratulations. Thank you, and goodbye.